In the gleaming boardroom of MedTech Solutions, a dedicated healthcare negotiator was about to uncover the truth that would destroy her career. What started as a routine final review of merger documents took a shocking turn when she came face to face with systematic fraud that endangered thousands of lives. Charlotte Brown wasn't your typical corporate consultant. For 12 years, she had built her reputation on meticulous integrity in an industry driven by profit margins. When she discovered financial discrepancies that revealed a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of healthcare leadership, she had no idea she was walking into a battle that would cost her everything she'd worked for, but save countless lives she'd never meet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of MedTech Solutions' 32nd floor cast everything in harsh relief at 11:47 p.m., transforming the gleaming conference room into a sterile monument to corporate ambition. Charlotte Brown sat alone at the mahogany table surrounded by towers of documents that represented 18 months of her life. Every sleepless night, every missed dinner with friends, every compromise she'd made in service of what everyone called the deal of the decade. Her fingers traced the edges of the merger agreement's final draft, a document that would bind 5 major hospitals into a two-poed-and-twaddled healthcare network. The numbers should have danced before her eyes with the poetry of perfect arithmetic, but instead, they felt cold and foreign. Charlotte had built her reputation on attention to detail that bordered on obsession, a trait her working-class parents had instilled in her through countless evenings watching her mother count pills at the kitchen table after her nursing shifts, ensuring every patient received exactly what they needed. Her phone buzzed against the polished surface. Another congratulatory text from a colleague. "Charlotte, you absolute legend. This deal is going to revolutionize healthcare. Drinks tomorrow?" She set the phone aside without responding, her eyes returning to the financial projections on page 47. The debt-to-equity ratios had shifted since yesterday's draft, subtle changes that wouldn't catch most reviewers' attention. But Charlotte wasn't most reviewers. She reached for her laptop and pulled up her original calculations from 3 weeks ago. The numbers didn't match. Patient care budget allocations that had been robust in earlier versions now appeared streamlined, almost skeletal. Regulatory compliance timelines that had been carefully staged over 2 years were suddenly compressed into 6 months. Every fiber of her being, trained through 12 years of healthcare merger experience, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong. Charlotte's father had always said the hospitals weren't factories, that you couldn't optimize human suffering like a production line. Those words echoed now as Charlotte stared at cost-cutting measures that seemed designed to squeeze efficiency from patient care itself. She thought of her mother's stories from the emergency room, how 5 minutes could mean the difference between life and death, how understaffing wasn't just a budget concern but a moral failing. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone to call Janet Richardson, her lead financial analyst. The call went straight to voicemail. Odd, considering Janet lived for these late-night number crunches and typically answered within 2 rings. She tried Marcus Chen, the regulatory compliance specialist who had been her constant partner throughout the merger process. Another voicemail. A cold certainty began to settle in Charlotte's stomach. The conference room door was closed, but Charlotte could hear the soft hum of the building's overnight cleaning crew moving through the corridors. She called Sarah Mitchell, her business partner and the closest thing she had to a confidant at MedTech. The phone rang 4 times before Sarah's voice, careful and strangely formal, answered. "Charlotte, it's nearly midnight. Sarah, I need you to look at something. The final merger docs. There are discrepancies in the financial projections that Sarah's voice carried a warning she'd never heard before. You should be celebrating. The deal closes in 12 hours. Whatever you think you see, it's probably just fatigue. This isn't fatigue. The patient care allocations have been cut by 30% since last week's draft. The mortality rate projections for St. Mary's Hospital show a 15% increase that wasn't in any of our models. Someone has been changing." The line went dead. Charlotte stared at her phone, then immediately called back. It went straight to voicemail. She was reaching for her laptop to cross-reference the hospital financial records when her phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was local. Charlotte hesitated, then answered. Ms. Brown. The voice was electronically distorted, clearly run through a voice modifier. You're working late. Who is this? Someone who wants you to succeed. Someone who hopes you're smart enough to stop digging into things that don't concern you. Charlotte's blood turned to ice water. What things? You know what things. Close the deal tomorrow. Take your commission. Build your reputation. But stop asking questions about numbers that have already been finalized. These hospitals serve hundreds of thousands of patients. If there are problems with the financial structure, there are no problems, Ms. Brown. Only opportunities for advancement or obstacles to career growth. Choose wisely. The line went dead. Charlotte sat in the artificial silence of the conference room, her reflection ghost-like in the black windows that overlooked the sleeping city. Below, the lights of 3 of the 5 hospitals in the merger glowed like beacons in the darkness. Mary's, where her mother had done her residency 30 years ago, Presbyterian General, where her best friend's daughter had received life-saving cancer treatment. These weren't just acquisitions on a balance sheet. They were institutions that held the health and hope of entire communities. Charlotte opened her laptop and navigated to the building's security system, using her senior partner access to review the evening's footage. What she found made her hands go numb. Her access card had been used to enter the data processing center at 8:47 p.m., while she had been in the building's restaurant, having dinner with potential investors. Someone had cloned her card and was using it to access sensitive areas she'd never visited. She pulled up her office computer's access logs and discovered unauthorized remote sessions throughout the past week, each one coinciding with times when she had been away from her desk. Files had been accessed, modified, and carefully covered with digital fingerprints that would make it appear as though she had made the changes herself. The merger documents scattered before her suddenly felt like evidence in a crime she was only beginning to understand. Every late night she'd spent perfecting this deal, every ethical consideration she'd weighed, every patient outcome she'd calculated, it had all been manipulated by people who saw her dedication as a useful shield for their deception. Charlotte's phone buzzed with another congratulatory message, this one from a former colleague. Heard about your big day tomorrow. Your parents would be so proud. The irony cut deep. Her parents, who had devoted their lives to healing people, would be horrified by what was being done in the name of healthcare advancement. She gathered the documents into careful stacks, her movements deliberate and methodical. 18 months of work and she was just now seeing the truth beneath the surface. The pristine conference room around her felt like a mausoleum for her naivety, but also like the birthplace of something else, a determination to understand exactly what she had unknowingly helped to create. The clock on the wall read 12:23 a.m. In less than 12 hours the deal would close and 5 hospitals would be bound together in a structure built on deception. Charlotte Brown, who had never missed a deadline or failed to deliver for her clients, was about to make the first truly important decision of her career. She was going to find out what they were hiding, no matter what it cost her. Charlotte's alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m., though she hadn't slept. She'd spent the remaining hours of the night cross-referencing documents, following digital breadcrumbs that led deeper into a maze of financial irregularities. Her kitchen counter was covered with printed emails, highlighted spreadsheets and handwritten notes connecting discrepancies that painted a picture of systematic deception. The merger wasn't just flawed, it was fraudulent. She showered and dressed with the same meticulous care she'd always brought to important meetings, choosing her navy suit and silver scarf, the combination Sarah had once said made her look unshakable. As she fastened the scarf, Charlotte caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually steady hands trembled slightly. She looked like a woman who had glimpsed something terrible and couldn't unsee it. The drive to MedTech Solutions felt surreal. Morning radio hosts celebrated the sunny weather and discussed weekend plans, while Charlotte navigated through traffic, her mind rehearsing the conversation she would have with Robert Mackenzie. She would present her findings professionally, suggest postponing the merger closing until the discrepancies could be resolved. Mackenzie was ambitious and sometimes ruthless, but he was also pragmatic. Surely he would see that proceeding with a flawed deal would expose the company to massive liability. Charlotte pulled into her reserved parking space at 7:22 a.m., 8 minutes ahead of her usual arrival time. The MedTech building rose 42 stories above her, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a monument to corporate achievement. She had always felt proud walking through those doors, knowing she was part of something significant. Today, the building felt like a fortress designed to keep the truth inside. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor seemed longer than usual. Charlotte nodded to familiar faces: Jennifer from accounting, Marcus from legal, Susan from investor relations. They smiled and offered congratulations about the merger closing, their enthusiasm genuine and infectious. None of them knew what she'd discovered. The weight of that knowledge sat in her stomach like a lead ball. Charlotte's assistant, Maria, greeted her with unusual formality. "Good morning, Miss Brown. Mr. Mackenzie would like to see you in his office immediately. I need to prepare some documents first. Can you tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes? Maria's expression was carefully neutral. He said immediately, "Ma'am, he's waiting for you now." The 42nd floor executive suite was a temple to corporate power, all marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city. Charlotte had been here dozens of times for strategy meetings and celebration dinners, but today the space felt different. Hostile. Mackenzie's corner office commanded a view of 3 of the 5 hospitals in the merger, their morning activity visible as tiny figures moving between buildings. Robert Mackenzie stood behind his desk, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Flanking him were Helen Crawford from Human Resources and David Steinberg, MedTech's chief legal counsel. Charlotte's chest tightened. This wasn't the informal discussion she'd anticipated. "Charlotte, please sit down." Mackenzie's voice carried none of its usual warmth. "We need to discuss some serious concerns that have come to our attention." Charlotte remained standing. "Actually, I need to discuss some concerns with you. I've found discrepancies in the merger documents that—" "Sit down, Charlotte." Mackenzie's tone brooked no argument. Charlotte sat, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Helen Crawford opened a thick folder and slid a document across the polished conference table. The header read, "Notice of termination for cause. We have evidence that you've been accessing classified information without authorization and potentially sharing confidential merger details with outside parties." Mackenzie said, "Your security card was used to access restricted areas, and your computer shows evidence of downloading sensitive files to external drives." Charlotte's mouth went dry. "That's impossible. I've never someone cloned my access card. I discovered it last night when I was reviewing." "Brown," David Steinberg interrupted, his voice clinically professional. "We have security footage of you entering the data processing center on 3 separate occasions over the past week. We have digital forensics showing files transferred from your workstation to removable storage devices. We have phone records indicating contact with individuals associated with competing healthcare networks." The room spun slightly. Charlotte gripped the arms of her chair. "Those records are fabricated. Someone has been using my credentials to—" Mackenzie's voice carried what sounded like genuine sadness. "I've known you for 6 years. I hired you myself. This is incredibly difficult for me, but the evidence is overwhelming. You violated your confidentiality agreement, compromised the integrity of our most important deal, and potentially exposed the company to massive liability. The liability comes from proceeding with a merger based on falsified financial projections." Charlotte's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "The patient care budgets have been manipulated. The mortality rate projections are fiction. If we close this deal, people will die because of the cost-cutting measures hidden in those documents." Helen Crawford and David Steinberg exchanged glances. Mackenzie's expression remained impassive. "Your employment with MedTech Solutions is terminated, effective immediately." Mackenzie continued, "Your security clearance is revoked, your company devices will be confiscated, and you have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings under security supervision. Any attempt to contact current clients, access company systems, or discuss confidential information with outside parties will result in immediate legal action." Charlotte stared at the termination notice, the words blurring together. 18 months of work, 6 years of building her reputation, 12 years of expertise in healthcare mergers, all of it swept away because she had asked the wrong questions. "I want to call Thomas Walsh," Charlotte said quietly. As my mentor and senior partner, he has a right to review this decision. Mr. Walsh has been informed, Helen Crawford said. He concurred with the necessity of immediate termination, given the severity of the security breaches. The betrayal hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Thomas Walsh, who had hired her fresh out of business school, who had taught her everything about healthcare negotiations, who had been like a father to her, had signed off on her destruction without even a phone call. The merger is scheduled to close in 4 hours, Charlotte said, her voice barely above a whisper. If you proceed without addressing the financial irregularities, you'll be responsible for compromising patient care at 5 major hospitals. Mackenzie walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Charlotte, you're a brilliant analyst, but you've never understood the bigger picture. Healthcare is changing. We can either guide that change or be crushed by it. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. Whose greater good? Mackenzie turned back to face her. The industries, the shareholders, the future of healthcare delivery in this country. You've always been too focused on individual trees to see the forest. A security guard appeared at the office door. Charlotte recognized him, Bill Henderson, who always asked about her weekend plans and showed pictures of his grandchildren. Bill's eyes were apologetic but determined. I'm sorry, Miss Brown. I need to escort you to your office to collect your things. Charlotte stood slowly, her legs unsteady. This merger will hurt people, Robert. Real people with families and medical needs. When the truth comes out, and it will, you'll have to live with the consequence. Mackenzie returned to his desk, already reaching for his phone. The consequences I'll live with are a successful merger that positions MedTech as a leader in efficient healthcare delivery. Your conscience is no longer my concern. The walk to the elevator felt endless. Charlotte could feel eyes following her from cubicles and offices, whispers beginning as news of her termination spread through the building. Her career at MedTech was over, but something else was beginning. A certainty that she couldn't let this injustice stand unchallenged. The elevator doors closed, and Charlotte caught her reflection in the polished steel. She looked like a woman who had lost everything, but also like someone who had finally found her purpose. Charlotte spent the first day after her termination in a haze of disbelief, sitting in her apartment surrounded by the personal belongings she'd hastily packed under security supervision. Her framed MBA diploma leaned against the wall, still wrapped in bubble plastic. Her coffee mug with world's most thorough analyst sat empty on the kitchen counter, a gift from Sarah during happier times. Everything felt contaminated by the sudden collapse of her professional life. The second day brought anger. Charlotte paced her living room, making lists of people to call, strategies to pursue, ways to clear her name. But every phone call to former colleagues went to voicemail. Every email to industry contacts bounced back with automated responses about company policy. Her LinkedIn profile had been mysteriously deactivated. It was as if Charlotte Brown had been surgically removed from the healthcare industry overnight. The third day brought the email. Charlotte was nursing her second cup of coffee at 6:47 a.m. when her personal laptop chimed with a message from an encrypted address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." Her finger hovered over the delete button. After 3 days of paranoia, every unexpected contact felt like a potential trap, but something about the message's simplicity made her pause. She opened it. "Ms. Brown, I know what you discovered in the merger documents. I know why you were really fired. I know you're questioning your own sanity right now, wondering if the discrepancies you found were real or if you've lost your grip on reality. They were real. I have proof. If you want answers, meet me at Rosie's Diner on Highway 44, 20 miles south of the city tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. Sit in the booth farthest from the door, order coffee and wait. If this is a setup, you have nothing left to lose. If it's real, you have everything to gain." Charlotte read the message 3 times, her heart hammering against her rib. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings about anonymous contacts and clandestine meetings, but the rational part of her mind had also trusted MedTech's integrity, believed in Robert Mackenzie's leadership, and assumed that hard work and ethical behavior would be rewarded. Rationality, it seemed, was a luxury she could no longer afford. The drive to Rosie's Diner took her through farmland that gradually gave way to strip malls and truck stops. Charlotte had never been this far south of the city, never had reason to venture beyond the corporate corridors that had defined her adult life. The landscape felt foreign and liberating, like stepping into a world where her reputation and career meant nothing. Rosie's Diner was exactly what its name promised, a chrome and vinyl relic from the 1950s, with red booths and a checkerboard floor. Charlotte arrived 10 minutes early and chose the booth farthest from the door, as instructed. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and tired feet, poured her coffee without being asked. "You look like you're waiting for someone important, honey," she said. "First date nerves," Charlotte managed a weak smile. "Something like that." At exactly 2 p.m., a woman in her early 50s entered the diner. She wore a navy cardigan over dark jeans, her graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to make herself invisible, scanning the diner's interior before approaching Charlotte's booth. "Miss Brown?" Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm Margaret Stevens." She slid into the booth across from her, declining the waitress's offer of coffee with a polite shake of her head. Margaret's hands were folded on the table, and Charlotte noticed the faint tan line where a wedding ring had once been. Her eyes held the particular exhaustion of someone who had seen too much and said too little for too long. "You took a risk coming here," she said. "Thank you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You said you had proof. Proof of what, exactly?" Margaret reached into a worn leather messenger bag and withdrew a manila envelope. 20 years of hospital administration teaches you to keep copies of everything, especially when you start noticing patterns that don't make sense. She opened the envelope and spread documents across the table. Financial reports, internal memos, patient outcome statistics, regulatory correspondence. Charlotte's trained eye immediately recognized some of the letterheads: Mary's Hospital Presbyterian General, Cedar Valley Medical Center. 3 of the 5 hospitals in the merger. "I was assistant administrator at St. Mary's until 6 months ago," Margaret continued. "I'd been there for 2 decades, worked my way up from scheduling coordinator. I knew every department, every budget line, every quirk in our financial systems." Charlotte picked up a financial report dated 8 months earlier. The patient care allocations were exactly what she remembered from her original merger calculations. "These numbers are the real ones. Before they were optimized for the merger." Margaret's voice carried quotation marks around the word optimized. "I started noticing discrepancies in March, when the preliminary merger documents were being prepared. Patient care budgets that had been stable for years were suddenly being revised downward. Mortality projections that had shown improvement were being adjusted to show different outcomes." "Different how?" Margaret pulled out a graph showing patient mortality rates over a 5-year period. The actual trend showed steady improvement in patient outcomes, better protocols, new equipment, staff training, but the projections being submitted to MedTech showed increased mortality rates, which justified reduced staffing and lower care standards. Charlotte studied the graph, her mouth going dry. They were manufacturing justification for cost cuts by predicting that patients would die anyway. Exactly. And when I raised questions about the discrepancies, I was told that budget planning required conservative projections, and that my concerns were noted but not necessary for the merger process. "So you kept digging." Margaret's smile was bitter. "I kept digging. I found billing irregularities going back 3 years, procedures coded as more expensive than they actually were, equipment purchases inflated by 30 to 40%, malpractice settlements that were paid out of general operating funds instead of insurance, then hidden in routine maintenance budgets." Charlotte felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The financial structure of the merger was based on inflated asset values and hidden liability. Worse than that, the corruption wasn't limited to one hospital. I made contact with people at Presbyterian General and Cedar Valley. Same patterns, same irregularities, same pressure to stay quiet. Margaret's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Brown, this isn't just about one bad merger. This is about a systematic effort to extract maximum profit from healthcare delivery, while maintaining the appearance of quality care. How many people know, more than you'd think, fewer than there should be. Administrators who asked questions were transferred or terminated. Doctors who complained about reduced care standards were pressured to resign. Nurses who reported staffing problems were written up for attitude issues. Charlotte thought about her termination, the fabricated evidence, the systematic isolation from her colleagues, and now me. Now you. But you're different, Ms. Brown. You weren't just a hospital employee, you were the merger architect. You have credibility, industry connections, access to financial documentation that proves the fraud. Margaret leaned forward. They fired you because you were getting too close to the truth, but they may have made a mistake. You're too prominent to simply disappear. I don't feel prominent. I feel like I've been erased. Then we help each other become visible again. Margaret gathered the documents back into the envelope. I have evidence of the financial fraud. You have knowledge of how that fraud was incorporated into the merger structure. Together we might be able to expose what's really happening. Charlotte stared out the diner's window at the empty highway. 3 days ago she had been a successful healthcare consultant with a bright future. Now she was sitting in a roadside diner, planning to become a whistleblower against the most powerful healthcare corporation in the region. What do you want me to do? Margaret smiled, and for the first time since entering the diner she looked hopeful. Help me save some lives. Margaret's documents burned in Charlotte's mind for 3 sleepless nights. Financial fraud was one thing. Numbers on spreadsheets, abstractions that could be debated in boardrooms and courtrooms, but the implications of what Margaret had shown her demanded she understand the human cost. She needed to see how corporate decisions translated into patient outcomes, and that meant finding someone who worked on the front lines of healthcare delivery. Dr. Patricia Hayes wasn't difficult to locate. A simple internet search revealed her position as Chief Medical Officer at St. Mary's Hospital, along with an impressive resume that included surgical training at Johns Hopkins and administrative experience at 3 major medical centers. What the search didn't reveal was whether she could be trusted or if she was part of the system that Margaret had described. Charlotte called St. Mary's main number and asked to speak with Dr. Hayes's office, claiming to be a healthcare consultant working on a research project about administrative efficiency. The receptionist scheduled her for a brief meeting on Thursday afternoon, noting that Dr. Hayes had only 20 minutes between surgical consultations. St. Mary's Hospital occupied 4 city blocks in the heart of the metropolitan area, its original 1920s brick facade now surrounded by modern wings and parking structure. Charlotte had driven past it countless times during her years at MedTech, but she'd never actually walked through its doors. The merger documents had reduced St. Mary's to financial projections and bed capacity statistics. Being inside revealed it as something entirely different, a place where human suffering and healing intersected in ways that no spreadsheet could capture. The main lobby bustled with activity that felt both chaotic and purposeful. Families clustered around information desks, medical staff moved with practiced urgency, and volunteers guided confused visitors through a maze of corridors that had grown organically over decades of expansion. Charlotte observed elderly patients being wheeled to appointments, young mothers carrying sick children, and worried-looking adults who might have been dealing with a parent's diagnosis or a spouse's surgery. Dr. Hayes's office was located on the 7th floor, in an administrative wing that felt removed from the clinical activity below. Charlotte arrived 15 minutes early and spent the time reading patient satisfaction surveys, posted on bulletin boards and studying organizational charts that showed the complex hierarchy of modern hospital management. When Dr. Hayes emerged from her office at exactly 3 p.m., Charlotte was struck by how different she looked from the polished executive she'd grown accustomed to at MedTech. She wore surgical scrubs under a white coat that showed signs of actual use, small stains and wrinkles that suggested she still spent time in operating rooms rather than just conference rooms. Her handshake was firm, her eyes direct and intelligent. "Ms. Brown, isn't..." "My assistant said you're researching administrative efficiency. I have to say that's not usually a topic that generates much enthusiasm around here." Her smile suggested she was making a joke, but Charlotte detected an undercurrent of weariness. "Actually, Dr. Hayes, I need to be honest with you about why I'm really here." Charlotte had rehearsed this moment, but standing in front of someone who devoted her life to healing patients made her planned deception feel impossible. I'm not conducting academic research. I'm a former MedTech consultant who worked on your hospital's merger, and I've discovered some disturbing irregularities in the financial planning. Dr. Hayes's expression shifted from polite interest to sharp attention. What kind of irregularities? The kind that affect patient care. May I show you something? Dr. Hayes gestured for her to follow her back into her office, but instead of sitting behind her desk, she led her to a small conference table near the window. The view overlooked the hospital's emergency department, where ambulances arrived and departed in a steady rhythm. Charlotte opened her laptop and pulled up the financial projections she'd compiled from Margaret's documents and her own merger file. These are the patient care budget allocations that were included in the final merger agreement, and these are the actual historical budgets that your hospital has operated under for the past 3 years. Dr. Hayes studied the numbers, her frown deepening as she scrolled through the spreadsheet. This doesn't make sense. According to these projections, our nursing staff will be reduced by 30% over the next 2 years, and our pharmacy budget will be cut by almost half. But our patient volume projections show a 15% increase. Exactly. And look at these mortality rate predictions. Dr. Hayes's face went pale as she examined the mortality projections. These numbers, they're predicting that more patients will die, and they're using that prediction to justify reducing care standards. She looked up at Charlotte, her voice barely controlled. This is monstrous. Dr. Hayes, I need to ask you something, and I understand if you can't answer. Have you noticed any pressure to change patient care protocols or staffing levels in preparation for the merger? Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the emergency department below. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had been carrying a burden alone. 3 months ago, I received a directive from the hospital board to review our resource utilization efficiency. Specifically, I was asked to develop protocols that would reduce average patient length of stay by 20% and decrease nursing hours per patient by 20%. She paused. When I responded that such changes would compromise patient safety, I was told that the analysis was preliminary and that my concerns would be taken into consideration. But the pressure continued. It escalated. 2 weeks later, I was presented with new protocols that had already been approved by the board. Reduced monitoring schedules for post-surgical patients, elimination of overnight nursing coverage for certain ward sections, substitution of less expensive medications for treatments that had proven more effective. Dr. Hayes's hands clenched into fists. I refused to implement them. Charlotte felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. What happened when you refused? I was informed that my concerns were noted, but that the protocols would be implemented regardless of my recommendations. When I threatened to resign, I was told that my replacement had already been identified, and that she was more aligned with the organization's efficiency goal. So you stayed. I stayed because I thought I could fight the changes from the inside. I thought I could protect my patients and my staff. Dr. Hayes's voice broke slightly. But 3 weeks ago we had our first preventable death. The words hung in the air between them. Charlotte had seen the statistical projections, understood the financial implications, but hearing about an actual human life lost made the abstraction horrifyingly concrete. What happened? 72-year-old man post-surgical cardiac patient. Under our previous protocols, he would have had continuous monitoring for his first 48 hours. Under the new efficient protocols, monitoring was reduced to every 4 hours after the first 12 hours. Dr. Hayes wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He went into cardiac arrest at 3 a.m. By the time we found him during the 6 a.m. check, it was too late. Charlotte thought about the merger projections, the mortality rate increases that had been built into the financial models. Dr. Hayes, I think that death was anticipated. I think it was factored into the cost-benefit analysis. Dr. Hayes stood abruptly and walked to the window. Below them, an ambulance was pulling away from the emergency department, its lights flashing as it disappeared into traffic. Miss Brown, why are you telling me that? What do you want from me? I want to stop it. The merger closed 4 days ago, but it's not too late to expose what's happening. I have evidence of financial fraud, and now I have evidence of how that fraud translates into compromised patient care. Charlotte joined her at the window. But I need someone with medical credibility to explain what these changes really mean. You're asking me to destroy my career. I'm asking you to help me save lives. Dr. Hayes was quiet for several minutes, watching the activity in the emergency department below. Finally, she turned back to Charlotte. There's something else you need to see, something that will help you understand just how deep this goes. She reached for her phone and dialed an extension. Nancy, is the evening shift supervisor available? Good. Tell her Hayes needs to speak with her immediately. She hung up and looked at Charlotte. If you really want to understand what's happening here, you need to see it for yourself. Charlotte left St. Mary's Hospital with her worldview fundamentally altered. Dr. Hayes had walked her through 3 patient wards where the new efficiency protocols were being implemented, and what she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. Understaffed nursing stations where single caregivers managed twice the recommended patient load. Monitoring equipment that had been reallocated to reduce redundancy. Family members sitting beside hospital beds because they no longer trusted that adequate care would be provided in their absence. Most devastating was the conversation with Nancy Rodriguez, the evening shift supervisor who had worked at St. Mary's for 15 years. Nancy spoke in whispers about colleagues who had quit rather than compromise their professional ethics, about medication errors that were increasing due to rushed protocols, and about a culture of fear that discouraged staff from reporting safety concerns. The worst part, Nancy had told them, is that we all know what's happening, but we feel powerless to stop it. Speaking up means losing your job, and staying quiet means watching patients suffer. It's an impossible choice. Now, sitting in her car outside Thomas Walsh's suburban home at 8:30 p.m., Charlotte faced her own impossible choice. Walsh had been more than a mentor. He had been the father figure she had never had, the man who taught her that success in business didn't require abandoning personal integrity. But Walsh had also signed off on her termination without even a phone call, and that betrayal cut deeper than anything Robert Mackenzie had done. Charlotte had been calling Walsh for 5 days, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that went unanswered. Finally, she had driven to Walsh's house, determined to force a conversation that her mentor seemed desperate to avoid. The Walsh family home was a modest colonial in an established neighborhood, the kind of place where children rode bicycles on tree-lined streets, and neighbors knew each other's names. Charlotte had been here dozens of times over the years. Holiday dinners, birthday parties for Walsh's grandchildren, quiet Sunday afternoons discussing industry trends and career strategies. The house represented everything Charlotte had hoped to achieve. Professional success balanced with personal fulfillment. Charlotte rang the doorbell and waited. Through the front window she could see lights on in the living room, and hear the faint sound of a television. After a long moment, the door opened to reveal Thomas Walsh looking older than she remembered. Walsh's usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, eyes that avoided direct contact. Walsh's voice carried a mixture of resignation and something that might have been relief. I was wondering when you'd show up. Can we talk? Walsh hesitated, glancing back into the house. Martha's visiting her sister. Come in. The living room felt different than Charlotte remembered. The family photographs were still arranged on the mantel. The familiar furniture occupied the same positions. But something essential had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of quiet desperation. Walsh gestured for Charlotte to sit in her usual chair while he moved to the couch, maintaining distance between them. I suppose you want an explanation. I want to understand how the man who taught me about integrity could sign off on my destruction without even hearing my side of the story. Walsh flinched as if Charlotte had struck him. It wasn't that simple. Then explain it to me. Make me understand how 18 months of work, 6 years of loyalty, and 12 years of friendship could be erased with a signature. Walsh stood and walked to the window overlooking his backyard. The garden that Martha had tended for 20 years was visible in the porch light, neat rows of vegetables and flowers that represented order and care. Charlotte, there are things you don't understand about how the industry works, complexities that go beyond individual deals and personal relationships, such as such as the fact that MedTech represents 40% of our firm's revenue, such as the reality that challenging Robert McKenzie would have meant losing not just your job but the jobs of everyone in our healthcare division. Walsh's voice was barely above a whisper, such as the knowledge that sometimes good people have to make terrible choices to protect the greater good. Charlotte felt anger rising in her chest. The greater good. Thomas, I've seen what the greater good looks like. I spent this afternoon in hospital wards where patients are dying because of the cost-cutting measures hidden in that merger. I talked to nurses who are quitting because they can't provide adequate care under the new protocols. The greater good is a lot. Walsh turned from the window, and for the first time, Charlotte saw the full extent of her mentor's anguish. Walsh looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks, whose carefully constructed world had collapsed around him. You think I don't know that? Walsh's voice cracked. You think I haven't spent every night since your termination staring at the ceiling, wondering if I've become everything I once despised? Then why did you abandon me? Walsh returned to the couch, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. Because 30 years in this industry taught me that fighting the system is futile. Because I've seen dozens of idealistic young professionals destroy their careers trying to be heroes. Because I was a coward who chose job security over doing what was right. The admission hung between them like a confession. Charlotte had come here expecting defiance or justification, not this raw acknowledgement of moral failure. Thomas, it's not too late. I have evidence of systematic fraud, testimony from hospital staff about compromised patient care, documentation of financial irregularities that go back years. Help me expose what's really happening. Walsh shook his head slowly. Charlotte, you don't understand what you're up against. Robert McKenzie has connections throughout the industry, the regulatory agencies, even law enforcement. The board members have political influence that reaches into the state legislature. These aren't just business competitors. They're people who can destroy your future with a few phone calls. My future is already destroyed. They made sure of that when they fabricated evidence against me. Your professional future. Yes, but you're young, talented, smart. You could start over in another industry, build a new career, have a life. Walsh leaned forward, his voice urgent. But if you pursue this investigation, if you challenge people with this much power, they won't just fire you. They'll make sure you never work again anywhere. They'll destroy your reputation so thoroughly that you'll become unemployable. Charlotte thought about Margaret Stevens, fired for asking questions. Dr. Hayes, threatened with replacement for refusing to compromise patient care. Nancy Rodriguez, forced to choose between her job and her professional ethics. And if I don't pursue it, if I walk away and let them continue sacrificing patient safety for profit margins. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Then you become like me, someone who chose personal security over moral courage, and who has to live with that choice for the rest of his life. Charlotte reached into her briefcase and withdrew copies of the documents Margaret had given her, along with Dr. Hayes's patient outcome report. She spread them on the coffee table between them. Thomas, look at these numbers. Really look at them. These aren't abstract financial projections. They represent real people who will suffer and die because of decisions made in boardrooms, by people who never have to see the consequences. Walsh picked up the mortality projections, his financial expertise allowing him to quickly understand their implications. Charlotte watched her mentor's face as comprehension dawned, followed by horror, then something that looked like determination. My God! Walsh whispered. They're actually planning for increased patient deaths as a cost-saving measure. Now do you understand why I can't walk away? Walsh gathered the documents into careful stacks, his movements deliberate and methodical, the same way he had taught Charlotte to organize complex deals. What do you need from me? Everything you know about the merger approval process, board meeting minutes, executive communications, regulatory filings, and most importantly, your credibility within the industry. Walsh nodded slowly. Charlotte, if we do this, there's no going back. Our careers in healthcare consulting will be over. Our careers were already over the moment we discovered the truth and had to choose what to do about it. Walsh stood and walked to his home office, returning with a key to his filing cabinet. Then let's make sure their careers are over too. Thomas Walsh's home office became a war room over the next 48 hours. File cabinets that had held 30 years of healthcare industry documentation were emptied onto tables, creating a paper trail that connected Charlotte's evidence to a broader pattern of corruption. Walsh's insider knowledge proved invaluable. He knew which regulatory filings would contain the most damaging evidence, which board members had histories of ethical violations, and which government agencies might be willing to pursue an investigation. Most importantly, Walsh provided Charlotte with something she desperately needed: institutional credibility. When a disgraced former employee made accusations against her former company, it looked like revenge. When a respected industry veteran with 3 decades of experience corroborated those accusations, it became impossible to ignore. Charlotte had researched Detective Rachel Foster before making contact. Her background in federal white-collar crime investigation, combined with her recent transfer to local law enforcement, suggested someone who might be frustrated with bureaucratic inaction. More importantly, Foster had been quoted in local newspapers about the need for stronger oversight of healthcare industry financial practices. The phone call was brief and professional. Charlotte identified herself as a former healthcare consultant, with evidence of financial fraud affecting local hospitals. Foster listened without interruption, asked 3 pointed questions about the nature of the evidence, and agreed to meet at the downtown police station the following morning. Charlotte arrived early, carrying a briefcase that contained the most compelling documentation Walsh had helped her organize. The police station felt starkly different from the corporate environments where Charlotte had spent her career: utilitarian furniture, fluorescent lighting, and an atmosphere that prioritized function over appearance. She was escorted to a small conference room, where Detective Foster was waiting. Rachel Foster was younger than Charlotte had expected, probably in her late 30s, with short auburn hair and green eyes that missed nothing. She wore a gray pantsuit that looked professional but practical, and her handshake suggested someone accustomed to being taken seriously in male-dominated environments. "Miss Brown, thank you for coming in. Before we begin, I need to make something clear. I've done some preliminary research on your situation, and I'm aware that you were terminated from MedTech Solutions under circumstances that could affect your credibility as a witness." Charlotte had expected this challenge. "Detective Foster, I understand your skepticism. That's why I brought someone with me." Thomas Walsh entered the conference room on cue, carrying his own briefcase, and wearing the same navy suit that had commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. Foster's eyebrows rose slightly as Charlotte made introductions. "Mr. Walsh, I know your reputation. You're taking a significant risk by being here." Walsh settled into his chair with the dignity of someone who had made peace with his decision. "Detective Foster, I've spent 30 years watching this industry evolve, from a calling into a business, and from a business into something darker. What Miss Brown discovered isn't an aberration, it's the logical endpoint of a system that values profit over human life." Foster opened a legal pad and uncapped a pen. "Tell me what you found." For the next hour, Charlotte and Walsh presented their evidence systematically: financial documents showing systematic billing fraud across multiple hospitals, patient outcome projections that anticipated increased mortality rates as a result of cost-cutting measures, internal communications discussing efficiency protocols that compromised patient safety, regulatory filings that contained misrepresentations about hospital assets and liability. Foster took notes throughout their presentation, occasionally asking for clarification about technical details or requesting specific documentation. Her questions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of financial fraud investigation, and Charlotte found herself feeling hopeful for the first time since her termination. "This is comprehensive," Foster said, when they finished. "But I need to be honest with you about what you're alleging. You're claiming that a major healthcare corporation, multiple hospital systems, and potentially regulatory officials have conspired to commit fraud that directly endangers patient lives. That's an extraordinary accusation that requires extraordinary evidence." "We understand the magnitude of what we're alleging," Walsh replied. "That's why we've been so careful to document everything." Foster leaned back in her chair, studying the documents spread across the table. "Here's what I can tell you. For the past 8 months, I've been investigating irregularities in healthcare billing across the metropolitan area, insurance fraud, Medicare overbilling, suspicious patterns in emergency department charges. What you've brought me fills in gaps I didn't even know existed. Charlotte felt her heart rate increase. You've been investigating similar cases, similar pieces of what appears to be the same larger puzzle, but I've been working from the bottom up, individual cases of fraud, isolated incidents of billing irregularity. What you're showing me suggests a top-down systematic effort to extract maximum revenue from healthcare delivery, while minimizing actual care. Foster stood and walked to a whiteboard mounted on the conference room wall. She began drawing connections between different elements of the case, MedTech at the center, with lines extending to the 5 hospitals, regulatory agencies, and financial institutions. If what you're alleging is true, this isn't just fraud, it's potentially racketeering. The systematic use of multiple organizations to perpetrate ongoing criminal activity. She turned back to Charlotte and Walsh. But investigating this properly will require federal resources, and that means convincing my supervisors that this case justifies the expense and political risk. What do you need from us? Charlotte asked. More evidence, and evidence of a different kind. What you've shown me is compelling, but it's primarily documentary. I need testimony from people who can speak to the human impact of these decisions. Hospital staff, patients, families, who have been affected by the policy changes. Charlotte thought immediately of Dr. Hayes and Nancy Rodriguez. I can provide contacts within the hospital system who have witnessed the impact of the cost-cutting measures firsthand. Good. I also need to verify the authenticity of these financial documents and ensure that they'll hold up in court. That means bringing in forensic accountants and potentially federal investigators. Foster returned to her seat. Ms. Brown, Mr. Walsh, I want you to understand what you're starting here. If we pursue this investigation, it will attract attention from people with significant power and resources. Your safety, your careers, your futures, could all be at risk. Walsh nodded gravely. Detective Foster, we've already lost our career. The question now is whether we can prevent others from losing their lives. Foster closed her legal pad and gathered the documents into neat stacks. I'm going to need copies of everything you've shown me. I'm also going to need sworn statements from both of you detailing how you obtained this evidence and what you observed. Finally, I'm going to need you to be patient while I build a case that will actually result in convictions, rather than just headlines. How long will that take? Charlotte asked. If we're thorough, 6 months to a year. If we rush and make mistakes, we get one chance to expose this, and if we blow it, everyone involved will disappear behind legal protections and political connections. Charlotte thought about the patients she had seen at Mary's, the nurses, struggling to provide adequate care under impossible conditions, the families, who trusted that their loved ones were receiving the best possible treatment. Detective Foster, people are dying while these policies are in effect. How many more preventable deaths will occur while we're building the perfect case? Foster's expression softened slightly. Ms. Brown, I understand your urgency, and I share your concern for patient safety. But if we move too quickly and alert the wrong people, they'll have time to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. The best way to save lives in the long term is to ensure that this investigation results in permanent change, not just temporary embarrassment. She stood and extended her hand to both women. Ms. Brown, Mr. Walsh, you've given me the pieces I need to pursue the most important case of my career. Now let me do my job. As Charlotte and Walsh left the police station, Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that someone in authority was finally taking their evidence seriously. Frustration that justice moved so slowly while people continued to suffer. But for the first time since her termination, Charlotte felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Detective Foster's investigation had been underway for 3 weeks when Charlotte received the phone call that changed everything. She was in her apartment, reviewing hospital staffing reports that Dr. Hayes had quietly provided, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Brown, this is Jonathan Pierce. I believe we need to talk. Charlotte's blood went cold. Jonathan Pierce was the chairman of MedTech's board of directors, a man whose influence extended far beyond healthcare into banking, real estate, and political circles. Pierce's name appeared on charity board rosters and political donor lists. His photograph graced the society pages of local newspapers, and his reputation for quiet power was legendary throughout the business community. Mr. Pierce, I'm not sure what we would have to discuss. I think you know exactly what we need to discuss, Ms. Brown. I'm sending a car to collect you in 1 hour. We'll meet at my office downtown. Come alone and bring an open mind. The line went dead before Charlotte could respond. She stared at her phone, her hands trembling slightly. Pierce's involvement meant that the investigation had reached the highest levels of MedTech's power structure. It also meant that Charlotte's activities were being monitored more closely than she had realized. Charlotte called Detective Foster immediately, but her phone went to voicemail. She left a brief message about Pierce's contact and her intention to take the meeting, then spent the remaining 50 minutes researching everything she could find about Jonathan Pierce's business relationships and political connections. The car that arrived was a black Mercedes sedan with tinted windows and a driver who said nothing during the 20-minute ride downtown. Charlotte found herself studying the familiar cityscape with new eyes, wondering how many of the buildings they passed were connected to Pierce's business empire. Pierce's office occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming tower in the financial district. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor felt interminable, and Charlotte used the time to steady her nerves and remind herself that she had nothing left to lose. Her career was already destroyed, her reputation already in ruins. Pierce might have power, but Charlotte had truth. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that screamed understated wealth, original artwork on the walls, Persian rugs on hardwood floors, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. A receptionist who could have been a fashion model directed Charlotte to Pierce's private office without a word. Jonathan Pierce was smaller in person than Charlotte had expected, probably 5'8" with silver hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Charlotte's appearance. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit and moved with the casual confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Ms. Brown, thank you for coming. Please sit down. Pierce gestured to a leather chair positioned across from his desk. The office windows provided a commanding view of the city, including a clear sightline to 3 of the 5 hospitals involved in the merger. I'm curious why you wanted to see me, Mr. Pierce. Pierce smiled, the expression somehow managing to be both warm and predatory. I wanted to meet the woman who has caused so much excitement in our organization. Robert Mackenzie speaks very highly of your analytical skills, even under the current circumstances. Mr. Mackenzie fired me based on fabricated evidence. Mackenzie protected the company from a potential security breach, but I'm not here to relitigate personnel decisions. Pierce moved to a sidebar and poured 2 glasses of what looked like expensive scotch. I'm here to discuss your future. Charlotte accepted the glass but didn't drink. My future? You're a talented woman, Miss Brown. 34 years old, impressive educational background, proven track record in complex financial analysis. It would be a shame for such talent to go to waste because of a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Pierce returned to his desk but remained standing, looking down at Charlotte with the patient expression of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. The healthcare industry is evolving, Miss Brown. The old models of care delivery are unsustainable in an economy that demands efficiency and accountability. What you interpret as cost-cutting, we see as optimization. What you view as corners being cut, we understand as innovative approaches to resource allocation. Charlotte felt anger building in her chest. People are dying because of those innovative approaches. People die in hospitals every day, Miss Brown. That's the nature of medicine. Our responsibility is to ensure that healthcare resources are used as effectively as possible to help the greatest number of people. Pierce's voice remained calm, conversational. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions about how care is delivered. It means sacrificing individual patients for profit margins. Pierce finally sat down, his expression becoming more serious. It means making rational decisions about resource allocation in an industry that has operated on emotion and sentiment for too long. He opened a folder on his desk and withdrew several documents. Miss Brown, I'm prepared to offer you a position with Meridian Healthcare Consulting. one of our partner firms. Senior Vice President, starting salary of $300,000 per year, plus performance bonuses that could easily double that amount. Charlotte stared at the employment contract. Pierce slid across the desk. The salary was more than she had ever imagined earning. The benefits package was extraordinary, and the job description involved exactly the kind of high-level healthcare consulting she had always aspired to do. All I would have to do is stop asking questions about the merger. All you would have to do is recognize that the merger has been completed, the regulatory approvals have been granted, and the healthcare delivery optimization is proceeding as planned. Pierce leaned back in his chair. Your concerns have been noted, and will be taken into consideration as we refine our protocols, but the fundamental structure of the merged organization will not change. Charlotte thought about her apartment rent, her student loan payments, her complete lack of employment prospects in an industry where her reputation had been systematically destroyed. $300,000 per year would solve every financial problem she had ever had, and provide security she had never known. She also thought about the 72-year-old cardiac patient, who had died at St. Mary's Hospital because monitoring protocols had been reduced to save money. About Nancy Rodriguez choosing between her job and her professional ethics. About Dr. Hayes fighting a system that valued efficiency over human life. Mr. Pierce, how many other potential whistleblowers have you made similar offers to? Pierce's smile returned, but it was colder now. You're not the first person to discover irregularities in our operations, Miss Brown. Most reasonable people recognize that individual concerns must be balanced against broader organizational objectives, and those who aren't reasonable find that their career options become quite limited. Pierce's voice remained pleasant, but the threat was unmistakable. The healthcare industry is surprisingly small, Miss Brown. Word travels quickly about consultants who can't be trusted to maintain confidentiality or who allow personal feelings to compromise their professional judgment. Charlotte stood slowly, leaving the employment contract untouched on Pierce's desk. Mr. Pierce, I've seen what your optimization looks like. I've talked to the nurses trying to provide care with inadequate staffing, the doctors forced to choose between patient safety and job security, the families who trust that their loved ones are receiving appropriate care. And now you've seen what your options look like, Pierce replied, his voice hardening. Take the job, Miss Brown. Start over with a clean slate and a generous salary. Continue down your current path, and I promise you'll never work in healthcare again. More than that, I'll ensure that no consulting firm in any industry will hire someone with your reputation for unprofessional conduct. Charlotte walked to the office windows and looked down at the city below. Somewhere in those buildings were people who had trusted her to structure a merger that would improve their healthcare. People who would suffer and die because she had unknowingly helped create a system designed to prioritize profit over human life. Miss Pierce, I spent 18 months of my life believing I was helping to create something that would save lives and improve care. Finding out that I was actually helping to destroy those things was the worst moment of my professional life. Charlotte turned back to face Pierce, but walking away now and letting it continue would be worse. Pierce's expression shifted from patient persuasion to cold calculation. Miss Brown, you're making a serious mistake. I've given you an opportunity to salvage your future. Don't throw it away for some misguided sense of moral superiority. I'm not throwing it away, I'm finally earning it. Charlotte walked toward the office door without looking back. Behind her she heard Pierce's voice, no longer pleasant or persuasive. You have no idea what you're up against, Miss Brown. No idea at all. Charlotte barely slept after her confrontation with Jonathan Pierce. Every sound in her apartment building made her jump: footsteps in the hallway, car doors slamming in the parking lot, the mechanical hum of the elevator. Pierce's threat echoed in her mind. You have no idea what you're up against. The words carried an ominous weight that suggested the stakes had escalated beyond professional ruin into something far more dangerous. At 5:47 a.m., her phone shattered the pre-dawn silence. Charlotte fumbled for it in the darkness, her heart hammering as she saw Sarah Mitchell's name on the caller ID. She hadn't spoken to Sarah since her termination 3 weeks earlier, and Sarah's careful avoidance of her at MedTech had made clear where her loyalties lay. Sarah's voice was strained, urgent. I need to tell you something. Robert Mackenzie resigned an hour ago. Charlotte sat up in bed, instantly alert. What do you mean, resigned? He submitted his resignation letter to the board at 4:30 this morning, effective immediately. The official reason is strategic differences with the board regarding future direction. But Charlotte, there's more. Security has been searching his office since 5 a.m., and his corporate credit cards have been suspended. Charlotte's mind raced. Mackenzie's resignation couldn't be coincidental. It had to be connected to Detective Foster's investigation, or her own refusal to accept Pierce's buyout offer. Sarah, where are you calling from? My car, in the MedTech parking garage. I've been here since 4:45 when I got the emergency notification about Mackenzie's departure. Charlotte, I think you need to know there are rumors that Mackenzie is planning to leave the country. His assistant was told to cancel all his appointments for the indefinite future, and building security was instructed to escort him from the premises immediately after he submitted his resignation. Charlotte threw off her covers and began pacing her bedroom. This is damage control, Sarah. They're making Mackenzie the scapegoat for everything I discovered. There's something else. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I was in the executive boardroom yesterday for a budget meeting, when Pierce arrived with two men I didn't recognize. They looked like lawyers or investigators. After the meeting, I heard Pierce tell someone on the phone that the situation would be contained within 24 hours, one way or another. A chill ran down Charlotte's spine. Sarah, why are you telling me that? Yesterday you wouldn't even look at me when I was clearing out my office, because I've been a coward, and because I can't live with myself if I stay silent any longer. Sarah's voice broke slightly. Charlotte, I've known about some of the irregularities for months. Not the full scope of what you discovered, but enough to know that something was wrong. I chose to look the other way because I was afraid of losing my job, my future, everything I'd worked for, and now I realize that my future isn't worth anything if it's built on a foundation of lies that hurt people. Sarah paused, and Charlotte could hear the sound of cars starting in the parking garage as the early shift arrived for work. Charlotte, I have copies of communications between Pierce and Mackenzie from the past 2 weeks. Internal emails discussing neutralizing the Brown situation and implementing containment protocol. I think they've been planning this resignation as a way to shift all the blame to Mackenzie while protecting the board and the broader conspiracy. Charlotte grabbed a pen and notepad from her nightstand. Can you get me copies of those communications? I can do better than that. I can testify about what I've seen and heard. I can corroborate your allegations about the document modifications and the systematic nature of the fraud. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke. I know I don't deserve your trust after abandoning you when you needed support, but I want to help fix this if you'll let me. Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and skepticism. Sarah's offer of help was desperately needed, but her timing was suspicious. Sarah, I need to ask you something directly. Are you offering to help because you genuinely want to stop what's happening, or because you think Mackenzie's resignation means the ship is sinking, and you want to be on the right side when it goes down? The question hung in the air for a long moment. When Sarah finally responded, her voice carried a vulnerability Charlotte had never heard before. Honestly, probably both. I've spent the past 3 weeks watching what happened to you and realizing that I could be next if I don't prove my loyalty to the new order. But I've also spent those weeks thinking about the patients whose lives are being affected by the policies we helped implement. Charlotte appreciated her honesty. Sarah, if you help me, there's no going back. Pierce made it clear yesterday that anyone who opposes them will be destroyed professionally and personally. You'll lose your job, your reputation, probably your future in the healthcare industry. I've already lost those things, Charlotte. I just haven't admitted it to myself yet. Sarah's voice was steady now, resolved. The healthcare industry I wanted to be part of, one that actually helps people, doesn't exist at MedTech anymore. Maybe it never did. Charlotte walked to her kitchen and started making coffee, her mind working through the implications of Mackenzie's resignation. Sarah, I need you to do something for me. Can you access Mackenzie's office before security finishes their search? I doubt it. The entire executive floor is locked down and only board members and senior security personnel are being allowed access. What about his assistant's office, or the shared files on the executive server? Maybe. Diane Morrison, Mackenzie's assistant, is supposed to come in at 8 a.m. to help with the transition, but she might not know yet that access has been restricted. Sarah paused. What are you looking for? Evidence of communication between Mackenzie and external parties. If Pierce is making Mackenzie the scapegoat, there might be correspondence that shows the fraud was directed from the board level rather than initiated by Mackenzie alone. But Charlotte, I think we need to consider the possibility that Mackenzie's resignation isn't just damage control, it might be preparation for something worse. If they're planning to destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses, we might not have much time. Charlotte poured her coffee and walked to her living room windows. The sun was beginning to rise over the city, casting long shadows across streets that were slowly coming to life with morning commuters. Somewhere in those streets, Detective Foster was probably preparing for another day of investigation. Somewhere else, Dr. Hayes was starting her morning rounds at St. Mary's Hospital, trying to provide quality patient care within a system designed to prevent it. Sarah, I want you to do something else. After you check Mackenzie's files, I want you to call Detective Rachel Foster with the Metro Police Financial Crimes Unit. Tell her everything you just told me, and offer to provide testimony and documentation about what you've witnessed. You've involved the police. I've provided evidence to someone who can actually do something about it. Foster has been investigating healthcare fraud for months, and she has the resources to pursue a criminal case that could actually result in convictions. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Charlotte, are you sure that's wise? If Pierce finds out that there's an active police investigation, he might accelerate whatever plans he has for damage control. Charlotte thought about her conversation with Pierce, the man's cold confidence and casual threat. Sarah, Pierce already knows there's an investigation. The question isn't whether he'll try to interfere with it, but whether we can provide enough evidence to make interference impossible. What do you mean? I mean, we go public. Today, we contact the media, provide them with everything we have, and make sure the story is too big and too public for Pierce to contain. Charlotte felt a surge of determination as the plan crystallized in her mind. Mackenzie's resignation gives us a news hook. CEO resigns amid healthcare fraud investigation is a story that every news outlet in the city will want to cover. That's incredibly risky, Charlotte. Once we go public, there's no controlling the narrative. Pierce has connections throughout the media industry. He could discredit us before our story even gets told. Then we make sure our story gets told first, and we make sure it's so well documented that discrediting it becomes impossible. Charlotte began pacing again, her mind racing through the logistics. Sarah, how quickly can you get those documents from Mackenzie's office? If I'm going to do it, it has to be within the next hour, before the transition team arrives and locks down everything. Do it, get everything you can, then meet me at Thomas Walsh's house. We'll compile everything we have and prepare a comprehensive package for both Detective Foster and the media. Charlotte, are you sure about this? Once we take this step, our lives will never be the same. Charlotte thought about the cardiac patient who had died at St. Mary's Hospital, about Nancy Rodriguez's impossible choice between job security and professional ethics, about Dr. Hayes fighting a system that valued profit over human life. She thought about her own 18 months of work that had been perverted into an instrument of harm rather than healing. Sarah, our lives already changed the moment we discovered the truth. The only question now is whether we're going to do something about it. After Sarah hung up, Charlotte spent the next hour organizing her evidence into a coherent narrative that could be understood by journalists and investigators. Mackenzie's resignation wasn't just a personnel change, it was the first crack in a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of healthcare leadership. As the sun rose over the city, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced since her termination: hope. Not hope for her own vindication or career rehabilitation, but hope that the truth would finally emerge and that real change might be possible. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas Walsh. Saw the news about Mackenzie. This is our chance. Come over immediately. Charlotte gathered her documents, grabbed her keys and headed for the door. The next few hours would determine whether their investigation would result in justice or whether Pierce's damage control would succeed in burying the truth forever. Outside her apartment, the morning air felt crisp and full of possibility. Charlotte had spent 3 weeks feeling like a victim of circumstances beyond her control. Now, finally, she was ready to take control back. The Dawn resignation wasn't just Mackenzie's desperate attempt to escape accountability. It was the beginning of the end for everyone who had prioritized profit over human life. Charlotte was going to make sure of it. The media storm began within hours of Charlotte's decision to go public. By 10 a.m., she and Sarah had compiled a comprehensive evidence package that Thomas Walsh helped them deliver simultaneously to Detective Foster, 3 major news outlets, and the state attorney general's office. The story that broke on the noon news was devastating. Healthcare CEO resigns amid fraud investigation, patients' lives at risk. Charlotte watched the coverage from Walsh's living room, surrounded by the documents that had consumed their lives for the past month. The lead story on Channel 7 featured Dr. Patricia Hayes speaking directly to the camera from St. Mary's Hospital, her voice steady but her eyes blazing with righteous anger as she described the efficiency protocols that had led to preventable patient death. "What we're seeing isn't healthcare optimization," Dr. Hayes told the reporter. "It's systematic endangerment of human life in service of corporate profit margin. Patients are dying because monitoring equipment has been reallocated, nursing staff has been reduced below safe levels, and treatment protocols have been altered to prioritize cost savings over medical outcomes." The reporter's follow-up questions were pointed and well-informed, suggesting that Charlotte's evidence package had provided exactly the context needed to understand the story's broader implications. "Dr. Hayes, are you saying that the $2 billion merger that was celebrated just 4 weeks ago was actually designed to reduce the quality of patient care?" "I'm saying that the merger was structured to extract maximum profit from healthcare delivery while maintaining the appearance of quality care. The financial projections that justified the merger included anticipated increases in patient mortality rates as a cost-saving measure. That's not healthcare. That's human sacrifice for shareholder value." Charlotte's phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. Reporters wanted interviews, former colleagues wanted explanations, and several law firms had called offering to represent her in potential whistleblower lawsuits. But the call that mattered most came at 2:30 p.m. from Detective Foster. "Ms. Brown, I need to see you immediately. Can you come to the station?" "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything is moving very quickly. The FBI has taken over the investigation based on the evidence you provided, and there are federal agents who want to interview you this afternoon." Charlotte's heart rate. Federal involvement meant the case had escalated beyond local healthcare fraud into something that could result in serious criminal charges for everyone involved. It also meant that Pierce's political connections might not be sufficient to contain the investigation. The police station was chaos when Charlotte arrived. News vans lined the street outside. Reporters shouted questions at anyone entering or leaving the building, and federal agents in dark suits moved through the corridors with the purposeful efficiency of people executing a well-planned operation. Detective Foster met Charlotte at the front desk and escorted her through a maze of hallways to a conference room where 2 FBI agents were waiting. Agent Jennifer Martinez was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Agent David Chen appeared younger, with the intense focus of someone who specialized in complex financial investigations. "Ms. Brown, thank you for coming in," Agent Martinez began. "Based on the evidence you provided to Detective Foster, we've initiated a federal investigation into racketeering and conspiracy charges related to healthcare fraud. Your cooperation has been invaluable, but we need to discuss next steps." Charlotte took a seat across from the agents, feeling the weight of the moment. "What do you need from me?" "First, we need a complete statement detailing everything you discovered, everyone you spoke with, and every document you obtained. This will likely take several hours, and it will need to be precise and comprehensive." Agent Chen opened a digital recorder and placed it on the table. "Second, we need you to understand that your safety may be at risk. The people you're testifying against have significant resources and connections, and they may view you as a threat that needs to be eliminated." The word eliminated hung in the air like a physical presence. Charlotte had worried about career destruction and financial ruin, but the possibility of physical danger hadn't fully registered until this moment. "What kind of protection can you provide?" "We can offer witness protection if the threat level escalates, but right now we're recommending basic security precautions. Vary your routines, avoid predictable patterns, report any suspicious activity immediately." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "Ms. Brown, I want to be clear about something. The evidence you provided has triggered the largest healthcare fraud investigation in this region's history. We're looking at potential charges against dozens of executives, administrators, and board members across multiple organizations." Charlotte felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. How many people are we talking about? Based on your evidence and our preliminary investigation, we've identified at least 30 individuals who may face federal charges. The conspiracy appears to extend beyond MedTech and the 5 merged hospitals into regulatory agencies, insurance companies, and political offices. Agent Chen consulted his notes. This morning we executed search warrants at MedTech Solutions, all 5 hospitals involved in the merger, and the offices of 3 regulatory consultants who facilitated the fraud. What about Robert McKenzie? Agent Martinez smiled grimly. Miss McKenzie was arrested at Baltimore-Washington International Airport at 11:15 this morning, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country. He's currently in federal custody and will be arraigned tomorrow morning on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. Charlotte felt a surge of vindication. Mackenzie's attempted flight confirmed everything Charlotte had suspected about the systematic nature of the conspiracy. And Jonathan Pierce? Mr. Pierce is currently under investigation, but he hasn't been arrested. However, based on the communications your colleague Ms. Mitchell provided, we expect to file charges against him within the next 72 hours. The next 4 hours were the most intense of Charlotte's life. She provided a minute-by-minute account of her discovery process, from the first discrepancies she noticed in the merger documents, to her confrontation with Pierce the previous day. The agents asked detailed questions about every conversation, every document, every person who had helped or hindered her investigation. Sarah Mitchell arrived at 4 p.m. to provide her own statement, bringing with her additional evidence she had retrieved from Mackenzie's office. That morning, her testimony corroborated Charlotte's account and provided crucial documentation of the conspiracy's scope and timeline. Thomas Walsh's interview lasted 2 hours and provided historical context that helped the agents understand how the fraud had evolved over several years. His insider knowledge of industry practices and regulatory procedures proved invaluable in identifying other potential targets for investigation. Patricia Hayes arrived at the station surrounded by a security detail that the FBI had provided after she received threatening phone calls following her television interview. Her medical expertise helped the agents understand how the cost-cutting measures directly translated into patient harm, providing the evidence needed to pursue more serious charges related to endangering human life. By 8 p.m., the magnitude of what they had uncovered was clear. The merger had been just one component of a broader conspiracy to systematically extract profit from healthcare delivery while minimizing actual care. The scheme involved fraudulent billing practices, inflated asset valuations, hidden malpractice settlements, and the systematic elimination of safety protocols that protected patients. Ms. Brown, Agent Martinez said as they concluded Charlotte's statement, "I want you to understand what you've accomplished here. Your decision to investigate those initial discrepancies, and your persistence in pursuing the truth, despite significant personal cost, has exposed a conspiracy that was literally killing people for profit." Charlotte thought about the cardiac patient who had died at Mary's Hospital, about Nancy Rodriguez's impossible choice between job security and professional ethics, about all the patients and families who had trusted that their healthcare providers were acting in their best interests. Agent Martinez, how many lives do you think we might have saved? Based on the mortality projections we found in the internal documents, the efficiency protocols being implemented across the 5 hospitals would have resulted in an estimated 300-400 preventable deaths over the next 2 years. Agent Martinez's voice was quiet but firm. Your investigation has prevented those deaths, and will likely result in criminal convictions that deter similar schemes in the future. Charlotte felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished, but also by the human cost of what had almost been allowed to continue. 400 preventable deaths, mothers, fathers, children, grandparents, who would have died because executives valued profit margins more than human life. As Charlotte left the police station that evening, she was met by a crowd of reporters and photographers. The questions came fast and overlapping. Ms. Brown, how do you feel about being called a hero? What motivated you to risk your career to expose this conspiracy? Do you think this investigation will lead to meaningful reform in the healthcare industry? Charlotte paused on the station steps, looking out at the city lights, that included the hospitals where lives were being saved because of her decision to ask the right questions at the right time. "I'm not a hero," she said into the cluster of microphones. "I'm someone who discovered that the work I thought was helping people was actually hurting them, and I couldn't live with that knowledge without doing something about it. The real heroes are the doctors and nurses who risk their jobs every day to provide quality care within a system designed to prevent it." A reporter from the front row called out, "What's next for you, Ms. Brown? Will you return to healthcare consulting?" Charlotte thought about her 18 months of work on the merger, her destroyed reputation, her uncertain future. But she also thought about Hayes continuing her fight for patient safety, Margaret Stevens finding the courage to speak truth to power, and Thomas Walsh choosing integrity over security. "I'm going to continue working to ensure that healthcare serves patients, rather than shareholders," Charlotte said. There's a lot of work left to do. As she walked away from the cameras and crowds, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced since her termination 5 weeks earlier. Peace. Not peace, because the fight was over, but peace, because she had finally chosen the right side of the reckoning had begun, and Charlotte was ready for whatever came next. 6 months after Robert Mackenzie's arrest at BWI Airport, Charlotte Brown stood in the renovated conference room of what had once been MedTech Solutions satellite office. The space had been transformed from a sterile corporate environment into something warmer and more purposeful. The headquarters of Healthcare Ethics Consulting, the firm she had established with Margaret Stevens and Dr. Patricia Hay. The morning sunlight streamed through windows that now overlooked St. Mary's Hospital, where a new administrative team was implementing the patient-centered protocols that Charlotte's investigation had made possible. The view served as a daily reminder of why their work mattered and what they had accomplished together. Margaret sat at the conference table reviewing a proposal from Presbyterian General Hospital, one of the 5 hospitals originally involved in the merger, requesting an ethics audit of their financial practices. The irony wasn't lost on any of them that institutions which had once been part of the problem were now seeking their help to become part of the solution. "Charlotte, look at this," Margaret said, sliding the proposal across the table. "They want us to develop protocols that prioritize patient outcomes in all financial decision-making. 2 years ago I was fired from this same hospital system for asking the questions they now want us to answer." Hayes entered the conference room carrying coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just completed meaningful work. She had taken a leave of absence from St. Mary's to help establish their consulting practice, though she still maintained clinical privileges and spent 2 days a week treating patients. "I just got off the phone with Dr. Sarah Williams at Cedar Valley Medical Center, Dr. Hayes. Their patient mortality rates have decreased by 18% since they implemented the new monitoring protocols we helped design." 18%, Charlotte. That translates to approximately 40 lives saved over the past 6 months. Charlotte felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with hearing about positive outcomes. The work was challenging, convincing hospital administrators to prioritize patient welfare over profit margins required patience, persistence, and creative problem-solving. But the results spoke for themselves. "Any word from the federal prosecutors about next week's sentencing?" Margaret asked. Charlotte consulted her phone for the latest update from Agent Martinez. Mackenzie got 12 years in federal prison. Pierce got 15 years plus substantial financial penalties. The judge specifically mentioned that their actions directly endangered human life in pursuit of personal enrichment. The sentences felt appropriate to Charlotte, though no amount of prison time could undo the harm that had been done or restore the lives that had been lost. Justice was important, but prevention was better, and that's where their consulting firm focused its energy. Thomas Walsh knocked on the conference room door before entering. He had officially retired from his old firm 3 months earlier, and now served as Healthcare Ethics Consulting's senior advisor, bringing 4 decades of industry experience to their efforts to reform healthcare financial practices. "Charlotte, I wanted to share some news," Walsh said, his voice carrying excitement that had become familiar since he'd found renewed purpose in their work. "I just received a call from Senator Patricia Morrison's office. The Healthcare Transparency Act that our testimony helped inspire has enough votes to pass the Senate next week. The legislation would require public disclosure of hospital financial practices, mandate patient safety metrics in all merger evaluations, and establish whistleblower protections for healthcare workers who reported ethical violations." Charlotte had testified before 3 congressional committees about the need for such reforms, and seeing those recommendations translated into actual policy felt like vindication for everything they had endured. Sarah Mitchell arrived for their weekly planning meeting, carrying a briefcase full of documents from her new position as compliance director for a regional hospital network. Her transformation from complicit insider to ethical advocate had been remarkable to witness, and her insider knowledge of how healthcare organizations operated made her an invaluable ally in their consulting work. "Sarah, how did the board meeting go yesterday?" Charlotte asked. "Better than expected. The board approved our recommendation to hire 3 additional nursing supervisors for the cardiac unit, even though it means reducing executive bonuses by 15%. Sarah smiled with genuine satisfaction. 2 years ago, that decision would have been impossible. But when you frame it as choosing between executive compensation and patient safety, the choice becomes pretty clear." Charlotte looked around the conference room at the people who had become her closest collaborators and friends. Margaret, whose courage in speaking truth to power had started the chain of events that exposed the conspiracy. Dr. Hayes, whose passionate advocacy for patient welfare had provided the moral foundation for their investigation. Walsh, whose willingness to choose integrity over security had given their efforts credibility and gravitas. Sarah, whose decision to risk everything for what was right had provided crucial evidence for the prosecution. "I have an announcement to make," Charlotte said. "I received a call this morning from the American Hospital Association. They want to hire our firm to develop national standards for ethical financial practices in healthcare merger. It would be our largest contract to date, and it would give us the opportunity to influence policy at the national level." The room erupted in congratulations and excited discussion about the implications of such a significant endorsement. Charlotte felt proud of what they had built together, but also mindful of how much work remained to be done. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Foster. "Thought you'd want to know. Just arrested the former CEO of Riverside Healthcare for implementing cost-cutting protocols identical to what you exposed at MedTech. Your investigation is still preventing death." Charlotte showed the message to her colleagues, and they shared a moment of quiet satisfaction. The work they were doing extended far beyond their individual consulting contracts or policy recommendations. They had demonstrated that ordinary people could challenge powerful institutions and create meaningful change when they chose truth over convenience. As the afternoon planning session concluded, Charlotte walked to the window overlooking St. Mary's Hospital. In the parking lot below, she could see families arriving for appointments, medical staff beginning evening shifts, and ambulances delivering patients who needed care. The hospital was no longer just a building where healthcare services were delivered. It was a symbol of the possibility that institutions could serve human needs, rather than corporate interests, when good people insisted on doing what was right. Margaret joined her at the window. "Any regrets, Charlotte?" Charlotte thought about her destroyed career at MedTech, her lost relationships with former colleagues, and the financial uncertainty that had characterized the past 6 months. She also thought about the 40 lives that had been saved at Cedar Valley Medical Center, the legislation that would protect future whistleblowers, and the growing network of healthcare professionals who now had support for choosing ethics over expedience. "None," she said. "The work isn't finished, but we're finally doing work that matters." Outside the window, the city continued its daily rhythm of life and death, hope and healing. Charlotte and her colleagues had learned that changing the world was possible, one hospital at a time, one policy at a time, one decision at a time. The choice to act with integrity was never easy, but it was always worth making. Their foundation was built on truth, and that made everything else possible. As evening settled over the city, Charlotte remained at the window long after her colleagues had departed. The lights of St. Mary's Hospital glowed steadily in the darkness, a beacon that now represented hope rather than corporate exploitation. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, no longer the ambitious consultant who had prioritized career advancement over moral clarity, but someone who had learned that true success meant aligning her work with her values. The 18 months she had spent structuring the MedTech merger felt like a lifetime ago, belonging to a different person who had confused professional achievement with personal worth. Charlotte's phone buzzed with a message from Doc Hayes. "Charlotte, just wanted you to know, the cardiac patient we admitted this afternoon received the full monitoring protocol we helped establish. His family will sleep peacefully tonight, knowing he's getting the best possible care. Thank you for making that possible." Charlotte smiled, understanding finally what her mother had tried to teach her all those years ago when she counted pills at their kitchen table. Healthcare wasn't about numbers on spreadsheets or profit margins in quarterly reports. It was about human beings trusting that others would care for them in their most vulnerable moments. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and for as long as people needed advocates for ethical healthcare. Charlotte had found her calling at last, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The foundation they had built was solid, and the future was bright with possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.